Ambassador Mark Regev is a senior advisor to Israel's Prime Minister and is live with us. Hello.
Good morning.
Is Kamala Harris right? Are too many innocent Palestinians being killed?
Yes, unfortunately, she's all too right. Since the beginning of this war, we've seen too many innocent civilians caught up in the crossfire between Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas. We've made a maximum effort to try to see civilians leave areas of conflict, to get out of danger. Unfortunately, Hamas has had the opposite strategy, forcing people to stay even at gunpoint. And as a result, there have been far too many civilian casualties. But that is Hamas's responsibility for deliberately preventing people from leaving combat zones. And of course, their whole strategy is built on using Gaza's civilians as a human shield.
You say that Hamas is stopping people from leaving combat zones, but as we were just hearing from someone in Khan Yunis, it seems like everywhere is a combat zone at the moment. He talked about people in Khan Yunis being told to flee to Rafah, and yet we know there's fighting in Rafah. Is there anywhere safe that anyone can go?
On the contrary, I heard the gentleman before me, and he said there are specific areas inside Khan Yunis where we've notified that in those specific areas there is expected to be combat, and we're urging people to leave so they're not caught up in the crossfire. And we've designated specific safer areas for people to move to. The whole idea is to save lives. That's the point of identifying areas where we know there's going to be combat and requesting people to leave. We don't want to see them caught up in the crossfire.
And yet is even moving people safe, especially on the scale that we're seeing? As I mentioned, the UN said it's around 80% of the population who's being internally displaced. People, if they are finding somewhere safe, they're finding that it's massively overcrowded. And as we were hearing from the World Health Organization a little bit early on in the programme, there's a concern that soon disease and ill health that you get from that kind of overcrowding might overtake deaths from the bombardment.
So obviously we don't want to see that to happen, and we've not called for everyone in Khan Yunis to relocate. On the contrary, we've been very specific, as your report said, about neighborhoods where we know there's going to be fighting. And when people are moving to the safer areas, we urge the international humanitarian organizations, the UN and the other organizations, please, you have to get your act together. We've given you the details of these communities already days ago. You need to establish there, please, to deal with the people who are internally moved. There should be shelter, there should be tents, there should be a field hospital. I know they've started to do these things, but it's time to move into high gear.
You say that they need to get their act together, but they're saying to you, well, that would be fine, but if we can get the supplies, and their continued point is that they aren't getting enough of supplies, of fuel.
Well, we had during the pause, the humanitarian pause that unfortunately Hamas broke and we had to return to combat. But during that period, there was a period of, 7 days where supplies came in at an unprecedented level. And even today, even yesterday with the increase in fighting, we had, I believe, over 100 trucks entering Gaza. So we are committed that even though combat has been resumed, that humanitarian supplies still enter Gaza and reach the people who need those supplies.
And yet we're talking about on Saturday 100 trucks, and we're also talking about 1.8 million displaced people. Anyone can do the maths on that, can't they? That's not enough.
Once again, we have to do more. The international community has to do more. But unfortunately, we have to understand it.
When you say you have to do more, what do you mean that you have to do more of?
Well, we have to make sure this never happens again, and that's why we have to defeat Hamas and remove it from power in Gaza.
Not in the macro sense of the war, but I mean specifically on the humanitarian issues that we're seeing at the moment. You said we have to do more. What do you think you have to do more on that front?
Well, obviously the trucks coming into Gaza have to be screened, and we've been urging people to help us with that effort to screen all the vehicles coming into Gaza to make sure that Hamas isn't using the humanitarian supplies that come into Gaza to bring in weapons and so forth for their military machine. That's obviously a concern, but we have to do that quicker and more effectively, and I believe we are. And the international community has to get...
You think you've been too slow with that? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. I think everything is work in progress when the framework of a war, and I think also people on all sides got used to there being this pause, and when the pause was there, it was obviously easier. Now we've got to make a major effort. Everybody has to make a major effort to make sure that despite ongoing combat, that we facilitate the maximum possible entry into Gaza of humanitarian relief, whether it's food or it's water or it's medicine or it's tents.
Do you share the worry of the US Defence Secretary that what could be happening here with the humanitarian crisis and the number of dead civilians is that you could end up, in his words, replacing a tactical victory with a strategic defeat? His words were, you're at risk of pushing people into the arms of the enemy. Is that something that concerns you?
So, we agree with him in that we don't want to see civilians caught up in crossfire, precisely because, first of all, for moral reasons, and secondly, it's a tactical mistake. It's a failure. But on the larger question, no. I think once we have defeated Hamas, and we will defeat Hamas, and the people of Gaza will be able to speak freely, because at the moment anyone in Hamas-controlled territory cannot speak freely. But once they have been defeated, I'm sure there'll be an outpouring of anger against Hamas, not because they like Israel necessarily. I understand the historical animosity, but because they will see what Hamas has brought upon Gaza. Hamas has been in power for 16 years. What have they brought Gaza? Just pain, suffering, and poverty. And now it's all going to end in this crescendo of violence that Hamas initiated. Hamas started this war when they attacked Israel and brutally murdered our people on October 7th. And Hamas was responsible for the failure of the humanitarian pause to continue. They were the ones who stopped delivering, releasing hostages. People of Gaza are not stupid. They understand this.
When your offensive started in the north, we had airstrikes, and that was followed by a ground offensive. We're currently seeing airstrikes in the south. Should we also expect some kind of ground offensive soon?
Definitely. Specifically in parts of Khan Yunis, there is a major Hamas military infrastructure, including the presence of key Hamas commanders, and we will go after them. You can't defeat Hamas without taking out its command and control and without destroying its military infrastructure.
Do you see talks as mediated by Qatar with Hamas resuming at any point before that ground incursion starts?
I think that's highly unlikely, precisely because we had the talks were at a total impasse. Hamas agreed to a list. They agreed to a list of women and children to be released. And then they reneged on their commitments. Not just the Israeli side say so. Other people involved in the negotiations have publicly attested to that. So if we are back at fighting, if the humanitarian pause to release hostages has ended, it's only because of Hamas's own decisions. Apparently, that they don't care about Israeli life is clear, but it's becoming increasingly obvious to everyone that they care very little about Palestinian life either.
Ambassador Mark Regev, thank you very much for your time. He's a senior advisor to Israel's Prime Minister.